G'day, Dublin. How you doing? Good. So, I'm Mama Duck. I'm known around Ireland comedy circles as the walking Madonna whore dichotomy because I look like an Irish mammy, but I don't sound like one, and the stories I tell would make you blush when you went to Mass. So, I grew up in WA. So, WA was, of course, settled by the English. Boo. But because it was like a boom-bust economy, we have a very strong relationship with the sex industry, so which you don't have in Ireland. So I've got all of the stories, like told since I was knee-high to a grasshopper, as we say in Australia. And I'd like to point out that sex and death are closely intertwined. So I had an uncle who was an ambulance driver in Ambo, and in Perth there is an entertainment district historically known for its red light district, and it's called Northbridge. Now, at the turn of the last century, 1 in 3 women in the Swan colony had syphilis, or at least one STD, because the only contraception available was for the men to cross the bridge over to the red light district in Northbridge and have a bit of a go with the ladies of the night, the unfortunates, and then they would cross the bridge and go back to their wives, of course, and contamination would run rampant. But my uncle, the ambulance driver, in the 80s, Northbridge, being the entertainment precinct and the day of the long lunches, businessmen would go out and meet each other for the long lunch at a Chinese restaurant or some such. And above the restaurants, there would invariably be brothels. So the middle-aged men would go and have the long lunches, they'd fill themselves up on chop suey and wine, and then they'd think, no point going back to the office now. I think I might just nip upstairs. And then inevitably, 1 or 2 of them would clutch their chest and die on the job, as it were, in the Northbridge district, and then the call would go out on the ambulance, and then all of the ambulance drivers would be racing each other to get to Northbridge because they all wanted the job, because they all wanted to go in and see the brothels. Now, when I grew up, I went to work in Northbridge in the sex industry. I used to work in the peep show and I used to work in the sex shop. But while I was working there, I was often reminded of the story my father told me of the local farmer who would... I grew up in a little town called Donnybrook, named after the one over here, back when it was known for the getting drunk and brawling at the fair as opposed to RTE, and sorry, where did I go? The apple truck driver from my little town, Donnybrook, came up to Northbridge because there was a farmer's market nearby. He dropped off his apples and then he went to visit one of the little cottages in Northbridge, at James Street. But the girl of the night, or the afternoon rather, her heart wasn't really in it. So he came away saying, no matter what I did to her, I couldn't get her to stop eating the bloody apple she had in her hand. She just laid back. Must be about a 10th client of the afternoon. And talk about distraction, talk about disassociation. It was when I was working in Northbridge, I met a young girl of the night. Well, I met many girls of the night. But one who would she would go and book into a motel early in the morning on the motorway, on the freeway. Good business sense, because when the guys were going to their jobs, they'd just pull into the motel where she was, and she would actually answer the phone while they're on the job, and they would object, and she'd go, "You're getting it?" So very business-minded. But sex and death, as I said, very, very closely linked. In fact, pigs will mount each other as they go up the ramps to the abattoir. So hardwired is our biological imperative. But the ambulance drivers would also around that district, they'd come and tell me all kinds of stories about men who were caught, you know, dead on the couch by their wives coming back from church, and they'd be like asleep in front of porn on the television with their dingling in a vacuum cleaner or some such. In point of fact, my first husband died of autoerotic asphyxiation. He was always highly strung. The wanker. But when I worked in the peep show and in the sex shop, there were two branches of the sex shop. One had a peep show, and the other one, in the CBD, had a porn cinema. And one day, I got a text from my friend who was at the counter at the other one, and he said, "A man has died in the porn cinema." And I immediately checked back and like, zipped or unzipped? He said, unzipped. I'm like, so it was like, he said, yes, was. But before they went in, the manager rushed in to try and revive him. He poked him back in and zipped him back up. And I thought, that's bloody lovely, like common humanity, preserving his dignity. He said, no, he just doesn't want to look at it. Because when you think about it, it's like, you know when you look down to see like your chest rise? Is the chest? Every time he looked down, he saw like this little, like this dead dick looking at him. So that's why I got tucked away. So sex and death closely linked. So when my first husband passed away from autoerotic asphyxiation, he was buried, and he was cremated with all the honours. But a week after the funeral, I got a phone call from the crematorium. I had to go and collect my husband's cremains. So at the time, I had a small child, and I thought, when I go to collect my husband's cremains, I'm going to be upset. It's possible I could be emotional when I am faced with the reality of what was formerly a husband alive and kicking, now in a little box about the size of a shoebox. So I went to my dad and I said, can you please look after the kid? I have to go and pick up Craig. And my dad looked at me and he could see that I was starting to get a little emotional, and that the weight of the reality of my situation, of my future, of decades ahead of me as a widow with small children, was weighing on me. And so he looked deep into my eyes and he said, don't let him drive. You've been fabulous, Dublin. Mama Duck.
Oh my God, Mama Duck,